All right, welcome back to the George Poulos podcast. Psychedelic t-shirts are out now at georgepoulos.com/store. Really love this shirt. If you're watching me on YouTube, you can see it on me as I sit here in Half Lotus, and your support on the merch is fueling this podcast. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And this shirt is dope as fuck. I have a question. So I got a great question on Instagram. All of your questions are always welcome on any of my platforms. If you definitely want me to answer your question, you can join me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Poulos. I will definitely write you a written response, and I will more than likely respond on this podcast if you are a patron member. And if you really want to get into some stuff, you can book a one-on-one session with me. But let me read the question. How do you meditate on these things? I've heard that already, but I don't know exactly how that works. Right? So this question was spurred from the fact that as I discuss on this podcast about love and dating and being triggered, I'll often say something along these lines, that when you get triggered by something, or when you're clinging to something, or when you're feeling anxious, that you should meditate on what's happening. So I think that's what the question is about, and I'm going to try to explain what I mean by that. How do you, when something triggers you, when you're anxious, stressed, or not just the negative things, but how do you, what do I mean when I say meditate on something? Because it's a very important skill. It's a very important practice. It's a very important tool in the spiritual toolbox. Let's get into this subject. The first thing I want to say is that meditation is not limited to a specific idea that you may have in your head, right? When you think of meditation, you're probably thinking of someone sitting in a half lotus posture, maybe sitting on a meditation cushion with the hands on the knees, the eyes closed, and focusing on the breath. That certainly is a way to practice meditation, but it's not the only way to practice meditation. And by the way, for the record, I think it's a fantastic way to practice meditation. This is the way that Zen Buddhism teaches. You sit there, you close your eyes, and you start focusing on your breath. And when you get distracted, you pull yourself back to your breath. This is a profound, a beautiful, a sort of meditation practice that will get you towards the truth. Absolutely, 100%. But when I am talking about getting triggered and meditating on the trigger, I don't mean just sit there and focus on your breath. I'm actually, the mind is an extremely powerful tool. And when I say meditate on a trigger, like when you get triggered and I suggest that you meditate on it, we're actually going to be using the mind. We're going to be using the power of the mind to understand what's going on. We're not just going to be sitting there silently and focusing on our breath. What you want to do when a situation gets you, and what I mean by that is you'll feel it in your inner being. When you're triggered, when you're worked up, when you've been ripped out of your center, when your inner peace has been shaken, when some situation or another, whether it's out of a relationship, whether it's something you're anxious about with your career, any interpersonal situation that knocks you off balance, any personal situation that knocks you off balance, really anything that throws you off center can be meditated upon. What I suggest is, and you can actually do this in a meditation posture, you could sit down in your half lotus position, your mudras, whatever makes you feel attuned. Just sit in the posture that makes you feel attuned. And you can close your eyes. And what happens when we get triggered is we usually default straight into the ego response, right? The ego is afraid. When the ego gets triggered, the ego wants you to freak. The ego wants you to take care of it. The ego wants you to do something to appease it, to appease the fear that it's feeling. It wants you to react, right? Usually when we get triggered, we just react unconsciously. What happens when we get triggered and we react unconsciously is we're playing out a pattern from the past. Our brain is going into some neurological pathway that has already been created because we've been through these situations before in the past. And we're simply repeating the pattern because that's what the ego knows as comfortable. What we do when we meditate on these things is what I do is I conjure up in my mind the situation that is triggering me. I try to actually evoke the trigger, to go right into it. This is already a huge step, because usually when we get triggered, we're so uncomfortable, we respond to that immediate ego reaction, and we're essentially immediately trying to appease ourselves, to ease the tension, to kind of make the trigger go away, right? Because it's uncomfortable feelings are coming up, so we're trying to immediately push it away, just get away from it. We don't want to feel this discomfort. What we're doing in meditation is just the opposite. We're actually trying to elicit this trigger response, right? This is very powerful in itself because you're teaching yourself that there is nothing to be afraid of. When you get triggered, when you have that fight or flight response, when you're feeling really, really anxious, when you meditate and just allow that to happen to your body and don't run away from it, in fact, we're intentionally trying to feel the sensations of it. First of all, we're giving ourselves evidence that there's nothing to be afraid of, right? So usually the ego response to a trigger is very irrational. It's as if whatever is triggering us, like let's say, I don't know, we went on a first date and that person is not responding to our text, right? They're starting to ghost us, right? Our ego somehow takes that very insignificant situation and creates this whole story about how we're unworthy, we're not being accepted. It basically creates a life or death situation out of a situation that is literally nothing, right? So by allowing this trigger to consume our body, we're showing ourselves evidence literally that, oh, this is not going to kill me. Look at this trigger, it's happening, and yet I'm still here. I'm okay. Look at that, The more you do that, the more you get triggered and the more you meditate on that trigger and actually allow it to do its thing through your body, instead of doing the unconscious ego reaction based on your past patterns, you build up more and more evidence that, these emotional triggers, these things that I'm used to running away from and pushing away, they're actually not dangerous, right? I'm allowing it to pass through me as I meditate, and I'm not dying. Nothing bad is happening. I'm actually just aware of the whole thing. And after the meditation session, I open my eyes and I'm still here. Everything is okay, right? So that's the first thing you do. You intentionally conjure up the situation. You think about the situation that is triggering you. Like you really bring it up in your mind, go right into the thing that you're afraid of, right? So, if we go with the first date example, imagine that person ghosting you. Imagine that person not responding. Imagine the worst case scenario that your ego is thinking of. Go head first into the fear. Like the thing that you're afraid of that's triggering you, bring it to the forefront of your mind. Look at it right in the face. Okay, so that's step one. And I've already explained that this in itself is a profound step. And if you take this step, you are already growing. You are already healing. But let's take it further, right? So this situation triggered you, right? So presumably when you conjure it up in your mind, you're going to start feeling triggered, right? You're going to start feeling the stress, the anxiety, and the fear. Now, instead of running away from it or reacting to it like we usually do, all we're going to do is sit there in meditation and pay close attention to it. That's it. That's it. Just pay close attention to it. What I mean by that is, how does it feel in your body to be triggered? So usually when I get triggered, I can identify a clenching throughout my stomach and chest, often a faster heart rate, often racing thoughts about all these things that could go wrong, or what does it mean, or, right, all these racing thoughts, perspiration in the body, all these things. You want to bore your attention in on how the trigger actually feels, right? Because we're not used to doing this. We're not used to paying attention. Usually when we get triggered, we rush to that reaction. We take the trigger, and our mind, what it does is it immediately creates this thing that is not real, right? It creates this, it takes the whole trigger and says, this is what it means, therefore I have to react in this way. It does this instantaneously. When you sit there and you meditate on what's getting you, you come to realize, oh, it's not this thing that my mind has decided that it is. What it actually is a bunch of different sensations, right? So we're trying to see reality in the face. We're trying to look at what is really happening instead of running with our mind's assumption, right? So that's why we're focusing our attention on the body, right? The heart rate. Just watch the heart rate. Just watch it go. Watch the tension in the stomach. Bring your attention closer and closer to these sensations, right? You can do the same thing with the racing thoughts. Okay, and this is a significant step. We're going to get deeper into the thoughts at the next step, but boring your attention on what happens in your body and in your mind is another important step on the healing process of healing and introspecting and learning about a trigger and what's really happening. Because one, as I say a lot on this podcast, a very important thing to understand is you're becoming the observer. You're becoming the awareness of what's going on. When we react automatically to a trigger, we think, like, our mind truly believes that we are actually being threatened. Like that trigger is a life or death situation. We gotta fix this because our sense of self is being threatened. When you sit in meditation and allow the trigger to pass through you, what you're actually doing is you're sinking back into the observer seat. You're sinking back into your higher self, who is aware of the trigger. Your higher self, your observer, is aware of all the sensations that are happening in your body and your mind because of the trigger, right? So you're creating a little bit of a dissociation, but this is a very healthy dissociation because you're actually looking at what's going on. Usually we respond to a trigger completely unconsciously. When we meditate on a trigger, we are actually finally taking a look at what's happening. So it's not a bad dissociation. Sometimes meditation gets a bad rep because people think it means you're dissociating or you're not caring. No. What we're trying to do is actually care for real. We're trying to care about we're trying to understand what's really happening so that we can actually respond. Buddhism makes a distinction between reaction, which is unconscious. It's based on your past patterns. It's based on your ego. And response. Response happens when you're aware of the total situation, right? You're aware of the trigger. You're aware of how your body is responding to the trigger. And you're aware of how your ego is reacting to the trigger, right? When you're aware of everything that's going on, then you can respond. Then you can actually make a response that is best for you and is best for the totality of the situation. But you can only generate that awareness by meditating on these triggers, right? That's why it's such an important tool in the toolbox. So that was kind of step 1 and 2. Step 3, if you really want to heal through whatever it is that's triggering you, if you really want to cultivate such a deep inner peace that you are okay no matter what is going on, and you want to get to a point where you don't get triggered as much, where you're actually able to see things clearly as soon as they happen and not get so triggered and be able to respond instead of react to things throughout your life, then you need to get into step 3, which is where we're going to work with those racing thoughts, right? And here's where it gets a little bit difficult to describe, because all of this stuff, you're like working with your mind, and it's like, how do you describe this stuff? But I'm going to try my best, right? So when you get triggered by a situation, usually one of the responses, right? Like I said, there's usually a lot of response in the body, and we've honed in our attention on that. We've looked at it. We've understood, okay, there's actually no threat here. My body is safe. These things are happening, but everything is fine. Then you have the mind response, right? Usually our mind will start racing with thoughts. I like to do this with my hands, where I'm motioning my hands next to my head, because these thoughts are racing so quickly about what happened and what it might mean, and am I unworthy, and does everyone hate me, right? So when you get triggered, your mind tends to just run with all these thoughts and all these scenarios about what it might mean and what might go wrong and all of these things. So we want to really hone, instead of just listening to these thoughts, right? We're again going to get into the observer seat, and we're not going to listen to the ego. We're not going to take the ego at its word. We actually first want to realize that we are aware of all these racing thoughts. Instead of picking that worst case scenario thought and literally getting dragged away by it, that's what's pulling us into our ego reaction. That's what's making us freak out and have a shit ton of anxiety. We're grabbing onto like that worst case scenario thought, and we're just letting it take us for a ride. Instead, we're going to cultivate that awareness. We're going to cultivate that observer perspective. We're going to notice all these insane thoughts streaming by our mind, these thoughts are begging us to grab onto them and go with them. Instead, we're just going to sit here peacefully in our meditation posture and just watch them go by. Just watch all these thoughts arise in our consciousness and then disappear. Arise and disappear. And it's going to start, they're going to be racing. They're going to be tempting, these thoughts. They're going to be so tempting. But we just want to sit here in meditation and watch them go by. And this is why in meditation, in like a classic Zen meditation, they teach you to focus on the breath. And as soon as you get pulled away, or you lose focus, or you get distracted, just gently come right back to the breath, right? We're going to do the same thing with these thoughts. It's very likely, especially if the trigger is very intense, that one of these thoughts is going to take us and grab us away. And we're going to completely forget that we've been meditating. We're going to re-enter that panic. We're going to re-enter that ego pattern, that ego reaction, right? As soon as we notice that we've been pulled away from our meditation practice, just come right back to the awareness that these thoughts are racing by, right? And you just want to take a mental note. Okay, that thought just took me for a ride, but now I'm back and I'm aware of these thoughts passing by. That's why the breathing meditation is so important. And if you're serious about your own healing journey and your own self-love journey, practicing a daily breathing meditation where you just focus on your breath, where you just sit there, meditate, and focus on your breath, that's why that's so valuable, because it's giving you this gift that we all have within us, this gift of awareness, this gift of being aware of everything that's coming up. And when something takes us for a ride, when something takes us for an ego trip, we cultivate the ability to simply and calmly and peacefully come right back to the center and remember that we are aware of it all. There's a way that you can take this much, much deeper, where you actually look at what these thoughts are telling you, right? Look at these racing thoughts actually pay attention to them. What are these thoughts coming from, right? So I think the best way I can explain this is with an example. Like, and I'll just ride with the first date example where we really like that person and we want them to like us and they're like not responding and we're getting triggered by it, right? So an example of some of the racing thoughts that may arise would go like this. Oh, what if they don't like me? I wonder what it is about me that they don't like. Did I say something wrong? Am I... Right? So these are like the initial thoughts that may come. And what you want to do is you want to like use your intellect for your own good. Dig into these thoughts. Where are they coming from? Right? If I take those thoughts that I just exemplified, these seem to be stemming from a self-doubt, a self-consciousness, a worry that I am not enough, right? A feeling that I'm relying on validation from this other person, right? So you need to look at the thoughts that are coming up and identify the root fears. This is the key thing. Identify the root fears. Usually the root fears are buried. They're buried by these surface level fears. What if they don't like me? What did I say that messed up that date? Etc. These are very shallow fears that are covering up the deeper thing, which is perhaps your fear of unworthiness, your need for validation from another person, right? Try to use your intellect to figure out what the root of the fear is, right? What's so powerful about this is there exists a truth, and the truth is that we are whole. We are completely worthy. We don't need approval from a random person. We are perfect. We are born out of this universe, so there could be nothing wrong with us. We were made perfectly. You start to realize that you are unaware or you don't believe these truths that we are perfect, that we are whole, right? So this is why getting triggered points to your inner work, because it always identifies a significant root fear or a significant conditioned belief, something very deep, deep down that we need to address for ourselves, right? This can be so powerful because, and I've done meditations like this with like dating and like sexual anxiety and all of these things. And I could do the same thing for like a big thing I've had is like getting triggered when a piece of content doesn't get a lot of views. All of those things I just named, getting triggered by those things kind of all point to the same thing. They kind of all point to this idea that like I am relying on other people to approve of me. What does that indicate? It indicates that I have not approved of myself. Boom. When you get there, that's the root. That is the root. I do not approve of myself, and I'm projecting this fear onto the situation. When you can introspect on those thoughts enough and traverse them down into the roots, that is your work. That is your work. As soon as you bring the root fear into the light, it begins to dissipate. And it begins to dissipate because the very act of that introspection, it's literally like this light to darkness analogy. You bring the root fear into the light, and then it dissipates because, there's nothing to be afraid of, right? Here I am. I'm safe. I'm whole. I'm perfect. I don't need this approval from other people. And you can employ your logic here, right? You can employ your logic about like, it doesn't really make sense to be freaking out about this, right? If I am whole, then I don't need this person's approval. So then what am I so worried about? Right? This all comes together. I can't tell if I'm explaining this properly. There's like a leap that is made, it's digging into those thoughts and bringing the root fear up here, and then you look at it square in the face, right? This is the thing we're so afraid of. We're so afraid that we're unworthy, unlovable, that there's something wrong with us. This is why we're hiding all the time. This is why we're so anxious about every situation we get ourselves in. This is why we're so anxious when we get on a date, because we're so scared of this. We're so scared that who we are inherently is unlovable. When you look at that in the face, you're so used to digging that deep down, and you're so used to reacting out of your ego and keeping that root fear out of sight. When you actually finally dig into it and you have the courage to look at it, something happens when you're looking at it where it just disappears. It just disappears. The threat goes away. And this is so tremendously powerful because now you understand. Now you have an awareness of the whole mechanism. You have an awareness of the whole game that you've been playing with yourself. You've been putting all this pressure on yourself to perform so perfectly, to get other people to like you in all these different situations for no reason, because of an unconscious, because of a totally arbitrary fear that is not real. When you have this total awareness, there is no reason to bullshit anymore. There is no reason to be anyone but yourself. There is no reason to perform. There is no reason to have anxiety. I'm literally not kidding. The anxiety, you bring yourself to a point where it literally is so stupid to have anxiety. Like, you actually come to believe that it is so stupid. When you actually believe in your heart that anxiety is stupid, you won't have it anymore. You won't have it anymore. And it takes that total awareness, and it takes that total courage of looking at what's triggering you right in the face and digging down into the root fear that you've been so afraid to look at. Take it and hold it in your hand. Hold that root fear. And realize that it's not real. And this is a significant process. This is a very significant process. That's what I mean. When I say to meditate on something, that's what I mean. That is what I mean. Oh man, you guys got me worked up there. Jesus Christ. All right, I just got a question on Patreon. Like I said, patrons get priority with questions and comments, so I'm very likely to address most, if not all, questions on Patreon on the podcast. And if it doesn't feel right for me to address on the podcast, I will definitely leave a written response. So here's the question. I read The Universe Has Your Back, and it helped me trust that things will work out. Speaking of trusting and letting go of control, what are your tips on that? Like when you let go of the skate YouTuber identity and transition to spiritual content. It feels like I'm frequently battling an urge to control or plan, sometimes coming from the ego. But this has led to backwards and stressful progress at times, and I know accepting gifts from people could be seen as being open to the abundance of the universe. Okay. The first thing to acknowledge is that the desire to control and plan our lives is one of the deepest conditionings we've been taught. We were taught in this society that we need to plan, work hard in order to get to a desirable destination in the future. My view is that this whole thing needs to be dropped, and we simply need to be here now in the present where everything is absolutely perfect, peaceful, and fulfilling and joyous, right? But be easy on yourself because of how deep this conditioning runs. It is expected that the ego is going to throw a tantrum. Right? When you try to surrender and when you try to let go and when you try to trust the universe, This is completely counter to the ego's way. The ego wants you to be fearful. It wants you to feel like you need to fight this fight and battle this battle in order to get where you need to go in life, right? So the ego is guaranteed to throw a tantrum when you start trusting the universe, when you start letting go, and when you start surrendering. The ego is going to freak because surrender is antithetical to the whole purpose of the ego. The whole purpose of the ego is to keep you tense and anxious and controlling and planning, right? So this ego reaction is expected. My recommendation, when you first of all, when you start finding that you are trusting and you are surrendering and you are letting go, first of all, congratulate yourself. You're doing incredible work, right? Then when your ego throws its tantrum, when your ego starts to make you fearful, when your ego starts to make you question yourself, what you want to try to do is simply be aware of what the ego is doing, right? Kind of like just how I explained that whole meditation process. See if you can just, look at how good it feels to trust and surrender. Look at all the beautiful things that are happening the more you let go and surrender. And then look at your ego reacting to it. Look at your ego throwing this tantrum, right? And look into it yourself. Don't just take me at my word. Look and introspect and try to find out, is the ego being rational, right? Try to uncover the roots. Like all of these fearful scenarios that the ego is creating, like, oh, if I let go and surrender and trust the universe, like all these bad things are going to happen. Go into them and find out if you actually believe what the ego is saying. It kind of is the practice I just described in the first half of this episode. It's right when you start to doubt yourself or have fear about your spiritual journey, that is essentially you being triggered. So then you want to meditate on it and you want to introspect on it and you want to come to your own belief that the ego is delusional. Come to your own belief that the ego is insane. When you believe that in your heart because you've meditated on it, because you've become aware of the whole thing, that's when the ego starts to fall away more and more, right? And when the ego rears its head and you start feeling fearful, just try to get right into that meditative mind. Just try to be aware of what instead of getting sucked right into what the ego wants you to do, try to take a look at it. Right? Where is that going to get you if you go back to the ego's ways? Where is that going to get you, and is that desirable? Right? And we all have the choice. We could choose the ego for our entire lives. We could choose a life where we're fearful and where we have to plan and control our lives. But what I've found through all my meditation and through all my cultivation of awareness is that listening to the ego is getting me nowhere. Right? Like the ego might be capable of landing me a job, but it's not the job that is going to make me happy. The job that is going to make me happy comes from a state of let go, a state of surrender, a state of pure presence, right? So you got to come to this to yourself, within yourself, through your own awareness. You have to really come to believe that the ego is absolutely insane and delusional, and it's not going to bring you peace, fulfillment, nor happiness, right? When you really come to believe that, it starts to fall away more and more. And then, where I'm at now, because I'm so deep on this journey, when the ego comes up with its fear, I'm like, oh, hey, ego, what's up? Good to see you again. And then he kind of just goes away. And I've gotten to this point because I've looked at everything and I actually think the ego is delusional. I actually it's not convincing to me anymore. It's not convincing to me. And I see that my allegiance to the ego came from what other people told me. And I see that they are not happy. Like these people that I listen to are not where I want to be. I want to find 100% peace, fulfillment, and joy. And really, I shouldn't say I want to find. I'll say I have that because it's within me. Sometimes I lose sight of it, but more often these days, I am 100% peaceful and fulfilled. And it's because I've let go of the ego. So listening to the ego again for me would be batshit insane, right? And I've gotten to this point because of my practices, because I've cultivated my awareness, because I've come within my own heart to believe that this way of life that I was taught to believe in, this way of planning and control and calculating and making sure I do this and that, I've come to my own belief that it's not going to bring me towards what I want, right? And I've experienced the other way as well. And the other way is bringing me, it's showing me that I already have it all, right? And the rest of your question. Right. So the transition for me from skate YouTuber identity to making this spiritual content, when I was making that transition, I did not have the clarity that I have now. When I was making that transition, my ego was constantly pulling me into fear. I was constantly afraid. Oh, maybe you should keep doing the skate videos because what if you can't make money with this other stuff? What if you're throwing your career away? What are you doing? You have to keep making skate videos, right? My ego at that time was very compelling, and it convinced me a lot that I had to listen to it, right? So that was a long process for me. And you could come in. Right. So I had to go through the trials and the tribulations, and the ego had to take me on many trips. And I really struggled, and I went back and forth between listening to the ego and trusting, and ego and trusting. And the more I trusted, the more good things happened to me, the better I felt. So I just started leaning in that direction, and it took a process of years for me. And now I would say I'm pretty much the tide has turned pretty much all the way towards trusting the universe and surrendering and letting go. And it's very rare that I get pulled back into the fear of my ego, right? And the more I go this way, the better it feels, the better I feel, the more fulfilled I feel, the more loving I feel, the less fearful I feel, and the more aligned I feel, and the more powerful I feel, and the more energized I feel. But I had to go through those trials and tribulations, and I had to, right, when I was actually making that transition, I was really doing the work. I was being pulled left and right, and I wasn't sure, and I was afraid to fully let go. And the ego was making me so afraid. So I went through that. I was like being dragged like a rag doll for a couple of years there. And during that phase, that's when my meditation practice was really important. I really had to do that work and look at those fears and see whether they were rational. And I had to find it for myself that it is safe to let go and trust and fully do what I was meant to do. Okay, and then I actually skipped over this part of the question. Let me read it again. It feels like I'm frequently battling an urge to control or plan, sometimes coming from the ego. And you give an example. I can buy this myself. I don't need to be given it. But this has led to backwards and stressful progress at times, and I know accepting gifts from people could be seen as being open to the abundance of the universe. This is actually something I was just thinking about, right? The ego becomes attached to very specific outcomes, right? The ego thinks that, oh, I need money, so I need to get this very particular kind of job in order to get the money, and the money needs to come in through direct deposit on a monthly basis, and this is exactly how it has to look, right? The way that the ego attaches to specific outcomes absolutely cuts you off from the abundance of the universe. And this example actually just came up. This just happened to me the other day. I was at my grandma's house, and she handed me a $50 bill. And I remember when my grandma used to give me money, I used to be like, oh, this like doesn't count. I didn't earn this money. Money is supposed to be difficult to make, right? You got to work for it. This doesn't count, right? But because of where I'm at in my journey, when my grandma handed me that $50 bill, I thought, wow, the universe is giving me $50 and using my grandma as the vehicle. Literally my grandma handing me $50 is the universe handing me $50. For some reason, the universe wants me to have these $50. So that's just an example, but that's an example to say, yes, I completely agree with you. The way that the ego thinks that your abundance has to come in this highly specific way should be let go of. You should open yourself to however the abundance of the universe is going to come in. That's going to be very, very helpful to you and to everyone listening. Right. And I might as well share this thought I've been having about money. And I haven't done a reading update in a while, but in terms of abundance and money and these sorts of things, the book The Game of Life and How to Play It by Lawrence Scovel Shinn. It's written in like the early 1900s, I think, or something like that. This book really clicked a lot for me in terms of manifestation and abundance. And that thing I shared about, that example I shared about the universe giving me $50 through my grandma, that sort of thinking came into my mind thanks to this book. And it's a very short read, and I definitely recommend it. I had something to say. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. Yes. So the transition from the skate content to the spiritual content, one of the biggest hissy fits that my ego was throwing was like, oh, if you stop the skate content, you're going to stop making money. Right? My ego was attached to this specific way that the money and the abundance was coming into me through the skate channel. What I've realized, and kind of where my mind is at now in terms of manifestation and abundance and energy, is this. If you, right, there's a law of the universe that energy doesn't disappear, it only changes form. I've realized that if you are putting your energy into the society, by the laws of the universe, it has to come back to you. That abundance has to come back to you. If you are outputting energy, that energy will come back to you, right? This is just how my brain is thinking these days. And what I was doing on the skate channel when I was attached to it and fearful of letting go is I listened to this story that my ego created that, oh, my energy has to be used in this narrow and specific way. And if I stray from that, I'm not going to get the abundance coming back to me, right? That is rooted in a scarcity mindset. It's this feeling that it's this attachment to this specific way that I must do things, right? It's a fearful mindset. It's a scarcity mindset. It's a belief that, it's a belief in scarcity and limitation, right? There's a fear holding me back from expanding myself and doing what I want to do. What I've realized the more I let go is your energy doesn't have to go into a narrow lane. I think it's this fear and this scarcity and limitation-based mindset that gets a lot of people into 9-to-5 jobs that they don't really want. They think that they've listened to what the society and the parents have conditioned them into believing, and they think their energy needs to be used in this specific way. Often this specific way makes them miserable, but people think they have to do it because of these limited mindsets, right? What I've realized is, no, you've got this whole wide open world. Tune into yourself and use your energy the way that your inner being is asking you to use your energy. What happens when you do that is your energy output is actually magnified. It is amplified. I almost want to say by infinity, because you're actually tapping into yourself. You're actually using your energy as it's meant to be used. Drop the ego fears. Use the energy as you want to use it. Your ego is going to throw a fit about, and my ego threw a fit about, you can't make money in this way, blah, blah, blah. That's scarcity, fearful stuff that needs to be thrown away. tune into yourself, use your energy how your inner being is asking you to use it. When you use your energy how you want to use it, you are putting tremendously more energy into the universe than you ever could if you're trying to shove your energy into a box. Do you understand what I'm saying? So then when you're actually pouring over with energy and sharing your energy with the world in whatever form that looks like to you, and you need to tap into your own intuitive heart in order to find out what that is, you are putting so much more into the universe. And because of the laws of the universe, it is guaranteed to be reflected back to you. And you have to let go of the specific way that you think it needs to be reflected back to you, right? So yes, accept gifts. Any gift that comes in is coming from the universe. It doesn't have to be an institutional company wiring a paycheck into your bank account, right? It can come in different forms. Let go of the specific way you think it needs to come in, right? Open yourself to abundance however it comes in. Let go, trust yourself, use your energy how you're meant to use it. That is my way. That is my way right now. And I'm currently in the process of seeing this confirmation, right? And speaking from my own heart, I highly advise and suggest to you that it is safe and it is far more worth it to let go of the ego fears and simply just tune into yourself and do what you want to do. So that's my response to your question. Thank you very much for your question. Someone ordered merch. Yay. Okay, last order of business for this episode is the rest of the reading update. So I don't even know. I'm about 150 pages in to A Course in Miracles. I was turned on to this book because of Marianne Williamson. I read her book, which is entitled A Return to Love. And A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson is essentially a synthesis, a summary of A Course in Miracles, which Marianne Williamson found profound during her spiritual awakening, right? She synthesized it, put it into her own words. That book made me want to pick up A Course in Miracles, and I'm not going to be able to tell you with my words how profound this book is for me right now. It is currently, it's like crazy to say it. Like I often will think that I'm already all the way open, but then I'll pick up a new book that opens me even more. And I'm sitting here reading this and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, how did this book end up in my hands? What the fuck? And it's just all coming right in and it's bursting my heart open. It's making me more confident in the path of surrender and letting go. And this book uses language that I never thought I could get into. It's talking about God and the Holy Spirit and the kingdom and all this stuff. And I think about how I used to be even turned off from like Buddhist terminology. And then I opened myself, I got into the Buddhist terminology. Then I loved all that Buddhist terminology, Zen and meditation and satsang and samadhi and enlightenment and all this stuff. And now I'm realizing that, oh, this book is just saying the same exact thing. But sometimes these things are worded in the way that cracks you even further open because it works for your mind. Anyways, this book is opening me significantly. This is a book of truth that I highly recommend. It's like really mind-blowing me. And I just don't know. I really don't know what to say. Sometimes you just don't have the words. And I generally have this feeling sometimes that words only point towards the truth of what you're trying to express. They cannot possibly contain the actual thing you're trying to express. Words are just a pointer. And I feel that way about trying to explain what this book is doing to me. But it took a lot for me to be open to this particular book. Something I'm doing on Patreon now is whenever I'm starting a book, or not when I'm starting, but whenever I can tell that a book is going to be significant for my journey of awakening, I'm just making a post with the book on Patreon, and I'm calling it the Patreon Book Club. And basically what it is that post will host discussion of the book. So if anyone wants to read along, join me on my journey of spiritual studies, we can discuss these books on Patreon. Any questions you have, any insights, any thoughts you want to share, put it in the comments of that post with the book, and we can get into it. And we can try to understand these things together. So Course in Miracles has been very exciting. I'm absolutely sucked into it. I'm going to read this whole thing. I'm definitely going to read the whole thing. Can't really put it down. Maybe I should try to say something. I feel like I said literally nothing about the book. The book is about awakening. The book is about dropping the ego. The book is about understanding the delusions of the ego. The book is about the power of surrendering and letting go and trusting the universe. The book is about everything I talk about on this podcast, so it only makes sense that it fell into my lap. I think that's going to be it for this episode. If you want to support, don't forget that we just dropped the psychedelic t-shirts at georgepoulos.com/store. You can also join the Patreon community at patreon.com/georgepoulos. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.